Our first keynote speaker is the Executive Director of the Maxim Institute. Before taking up this role, he was an award-winning print, radio, and television journalist. He was TVNZ's first US correspondent and has been a business development manager and an English teacher. He has written 3 novels, one of which, Their Faces Were Shining, was a finalist in the New Zealand Post Book Awards. He is married to Rachel and they have 4 sons, Roman, Felix, Wilfred, and Otto. You know, that's got an impressive biography. I don't think there's any more things you can achieve. Hoi nora. Please, his keynote topic is failure, faith, fortitude. Tēnā rā tātou katoa. Homai rā te piki paki paki. Welcome to the stage, Tim Wilson.
Yeah, you know, I've done enough. I think I should just go, right? No, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai. It is a real privilege to be here before you, who hold 65,000 rangatahi in your hands. I'm humbled. I didn't used to be this emotional, then we started having kids, and so you'll have to excuse me, but we'll get into that. Look, if you don't mind first, I'd like to say a karakia, and then we'll continue. Ka koa te hunga, he rawa kore nei te wairua. No rātou hoki, te rangatiratanga o te rangi. Ka koa te hunga, e tangi ana, ka whakamarieta hoki rātou. Ka koa te hunga, nā kau mā ke kariro hoki a rātou te whenua, kia noho a ihoa kia koto, ma ihoa koe manake. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. The Lord be with you. The Lord bless you. Look, my subject is failure, faith, and fortitude, and they are linked. And I want to start off by asking you to reflect on what does failure look and feel like. Just think of your own experience for 1 minute, and as you're plunging into your memories, may I suggest that it hurts? Like, so you may know me as the guy from TVNZ. You know, the face is familiar. Oh, were you at my brother's wedding? No, it's a bit awkward. I used to work on TV. And the best answer I had to that was, nah, it's not that. No. But I want to tell you that my first job for TVNZ, my big audition, I failed big time. Like, not just failure with a small f, like blowing chunks. And I want to give you a bit of context first about how much was riding on it. So at the time I had this audition back in 2004, I was living in New York in a place called Bushwick in Brooklyn. And Bushwick is on the periphery of Bed-Stuy, which is one of the largest ghettos on the east coast of America. I was living in a place that was infested with rats, and my job actually was, in the flat, was to empty the glue traps. Do you know what a glue trap is? So the rat runs across the glue and gets caught. The rat doesn't die. So you come out to these poor creatures who are they're glued. And so my job was to take the rats and the glue traps out to the construction site next door, find a brick and dispatch them. That was one of my jobs. There was a traffic island outside our front door of our apartment that every Sunday morning, without fail, there would be a burning car on that traffic island. You know, this is when you're broke in America, you really know you're broke. One day, I stepped out of our front door, and on the front doorstep was human feces, and it was steaming. Sorry, I had to say that. It's true. I had to say that. Now, how the heck does a nice kid from New Zealand, from Aotearoa, New Zealand, find himself in that position? Well, because I had these big dreams about working for a magazine called The New Yorker. And so at the age of 35, I sold everything I had and then turned it into US dollars, which was half of everything I had. And I went to New York to claim the job that they were holding for me on The New Yorker magazine. Guess what? They weren't hiring schmucks. So I had to then eke out a living somehow in New York City, and I was basically writing. So I was actually, I was spending American dollars, but I was earning New Zealand dollars, which is not a great business model, just if you're thinking of doing that. And so what happened was I got the opportunity to do this piece for TVNZ, and they were paying in American dollars. So having said that, I didn't like TV people. I was a print journalist. I started off at North and South. I was a serious person. I used polysyllables. I didn't like, these TV people with their fancy hair and their glib words, their nice clothes, and at the time, all their money. But being broke clarifies a lot of misbeliefs. So I had one chance to get it right, and that was to go down to Washington, D.C. to do a report on the 2004 inauguration of George W. Bush Jr. The story would lead the news, and it offered not just the chance to be on TV, but an escape from rats, feces, and failure. So what did I do? I FTD'd. I don't know, have you heard the expression FTD? Fail to deliver. That's the TV expression for it. You never want to do that. I made all the classic errors. I hired a mate to shoot and cut for me. Now, John Murphy had done some great work on America's Next Top Model as a shooter, but I didn't know whether he could cut or not, but he said he could, so why not? I didn't have a plan B if plan A didn't work, and I didn't make a timeline out. So we shot the thing, and the most important part, the piece to camera, where the TV guy or woman talks and points at things and then talks some more. That's the most important part of a TV news piece, by the way. That was great. I'd got that done, but then we were editing it, and that's when problems started to appear. And, John kept losing the file. It's like we had computer issues, and we had to send it to New Zealand because we were leading the news, apparently. And I just remember pacing up and down in my best suit, and at the Motel Schmucko or whatever it was where we were on a budget, and the foreign editor going, "Where the hell's the piece?" And John going, "Oh, we lost the file again." And at 1:30 a.m. I had to make the call, which was that we'd FTD'd, we'd blown it. And I don't know why, but I said to the person that I was speaking to on the phone, I was like, "So what do people think?" And the answer was so classic Kiwi. And it's like, "They're not very happy." So passag. Because in America, if you did something like that, and it would be like, "What do people think?" there would be a tsunami of expletives. And you would be in no doubt as to what people thought. So, not very happy. So, look, can I put this in context? I had failed before. I got suspended from school. I was the kind of kid, I was a good kid up until a certain age, and then I started doing a terrible drug called testosterone. So some of you are familiar with it. And I was the kind of kid who would ride his bike in through the school gates and then be presented with a detention slip by a prefect and then pull out my cigarette matches and burn the detention in front of the prefect just to show who was boss. And I didn't get suspended for that. I probably should have, but I got suspended for wagging school. And I remember looking up from my video game in the Whanganui Squash Rackets Club, where I was hiding out from school, to see Leith Power, the deputy principal, moving towards me like a great white shark. He was an immaculate man, Leith Power. He had a bouffant that just oozed. You know, you guys know this. Deputy principals are the skullcrackers, right? They get stuff done. And every well-pressed crease in that suit just oozed malice. And I looked up from my Space Invaders and our eyes met. And he said, "My office in 10 minutes." And I made it there in 9.5. Had to bike back. But he said to me something that I've never forgotten. And he said, "You know, you're very good on what you're against, but one day you're going to have to decide what you're for." And I'm going to say that again. You know what you're against, but one day you're going to have to decide what you're for. And of course, the testosterone answered, "No, I won't, whatever." And that sort of, and then, of course, because I'd been wagging, I got suspended, and there was a great conversation with my father about that. But that felt kind of glamorous, in a way, because then you could, you suddenly, you were the guy that got suspended, one of the guys that got suspended. But failing in Washington, D.C., there was nothing, there was zero glamour. So we drove back, we were driving back from having failed in John Murphy's Jeep. And I remember the sky was grey. It's wintertime on the East Coast. It's not pleasant. And my parents are on the phone going, "We thought you were going to be on the telly." And it's like, no, that didn't happen. And we didn't have the debrief because what was the point? We'd blown it. So it was just back to the rats, right? Well, no, it wasn't. It wasn't, because I actually did have, and I'm sure many of you have had this experience as well, as someone sort of arguing for you and standing in on your behalf, giving you a second chance. That guy, in my case, was, he was known as Wild Bill Ralston. He was a TV journalist who had moved into print and then gone back into TV. And I'd known him at Metro magazine. And Bill was quite a figure, because we would have, you see, again, this is sort of like journalistic culture. Let me tell you a bit about this. When the rest of the company, I was working at magazines at that time, when the rest of the company would have, informal Friday, Mufti Friday. At Maxim, we would have formal Friday. We'd all wear suits. Because journalists are outliers, they're independent thinkers, they're critics. And then we would go out for lunch because there was still money in magazines. And Bill would always say, I loved it, Bill would always say, with a look of surprise, he would say, "Red, white, or both?" And invariably we would have both, and the lunch would go on and on and on. The longest one I had was 18 hours, but that's another story. That's a long lunch. But Bill actually advocated for me, because everyone was like, "This schmuck's useless." And I was useless. But he gave me a second chance. He gave me a second chance. So the other thing, I suppose, was that they didn't have many people with Kiwi accents on the east coast of America, and this was the time, as well as of the war on terror, etc. So there was a bit of a supply issue, let's face it. So he gave me a second chance. So I didn't do what I'd done before. I didn't hire John Murphy. I made a plan, and I made a timeline with lots of time for editing. But I guess the sense of that failure, it taught me something, which was to be more of a planner I mean, if I think about it now, going to America, I remember having a conversation with someone who was a lot wiser than me. Say, why do you think the New Yorker is going to hire you? Do you actually know what you're doing? I was like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I had no idea. I just thought I'd put myself in the way of a situation, and that situation would develop. And what developed was Bushwick. So I became more of a planner, and TV helped me do that. I guess I also learned, can people do what they say they will do? I'm a bit of an optimist. I'm kind of time messy as well. I'm very relational. So that helped me. That failure helped me to deal with that stuff. And, I reflected on success. It's like you think, well, I'm reflecting on success. What does that teach us? Well, I guess when you succeed, you just repeat what you've done. But success doesn't always tell you the why of what you're doing. And I think failure teaches you a kind of humility. And in that sense, there's a benefit from it. So I took the feedback, and I actually got the piece to air. Hooray! And I got paid in US dollars. And I got another job. So they called me up again. I got another job, and then another job, and then a job after that. It was incredible. I couldn't believe it. And suddenly, just my life turned around. I left Bushwick. I didn't have to deal with the rats anymore. I moved to Spanish Harlem, which is not, if you know New York, that's not a super luxe area, but it was still a lot better than Bushwick. And suddenly, my life took on this unexpected momentum that I just couldn't. I was starting to have the kind of life that I hadn't conceived would be possible. Interesting thing about just, if you don't, I don't know how familiar you are with New York, but there's a sort of snobbery there. So people would be at these soirees, and people always would say, they'd say two things. New York's quite a carnivorous environment. It's a capital of status and ambition. And people would say, oh, what do you do? And I'd say, oh, I'm the US correspondent for TVNZ. And they'd lean forward. And then they'd say, oh, and where do you live? And I'd say, Spanish Harlem. And I would see the light go out in their eyes, because they knew exactly who I was. I was someone with a title, but no real heft in the sense of New York style. But I loved it there, and that was fine. So suddenly my life was taking on this momentum, and I was getting paid, and I was starting to have the kind of experiences that I just couldn't have imagined that I would have. For example, in that time, TV took you to incredible places. Television now is in a different state, and I think we're all well aware of that. And people say, will television survive? It's like, these things are the future now. And it's the technology, it's just been superseded. But that's another story. At the time I was in it, television still had resources, and it still took you to unusual places. So, for example, during Hurricane Katrina, I drove into New Orleans, a city that was drowning but on fire at the same time, to do a live shot. And driving in, they've got these sort of freeways around New Orleans, and I would drive there, and because of the flooding, I would take a turn, and I'd go down, and then I'd have to stop and turn the car around and go back to find my way to the live shot, which was actually in New Orleans City. And when I got to the live shot to do my live cross, there was a guy guarding it with a pump-action shotgun. So I knew they weren't messing around. That was really sobering. And just to give you a sense too of the mentality of TV at the time, sort of health and safety, forget about it. It was like the phone rang when I was in New York. There's a 1 in 100 year storm. Take a flight to Dallas, rent a car and drive there. Okay. But it was fine. It was fine. Look, I got to meet incredible people as well during this time of this unexpected time of harvest. I met Taylor Swift. I interviewed Taylor Swift, and I found out what happens when you ask Taylor Swift an unexpected question. So we were sitting there backstage, and she's in this room that it was called the Tea Party, and it was filled with Taylor Swift memorabilia and her name and just sort of teas everywhere. And I said to her on camera, I said, do you ever worry that you might wake up and find you've turned into a raving egomaniac? And her face just fell. And she said, well, no, because I worry about everything else. And she said, she listed it for me. You know, I worry that no one will come to the next show. I worry when I'm doing the show that I won't be able to hit the notes. I worry that the fireworks won't go off. And I worry that I'll never write another song again. And she said this to me. I'm still not sure whether she was deploying anxiety to nullify a charge of ego, or whether it was something that she hadn't expected and was being true about it. I'm still not certain. But that was one of those moments. Another moment was when Barack Obama was elected the first African-American president of the United States. This was in 2008. And I was running to the live shot he was going to give a speech in Grant Park in Chicago. 200,000 people were there. And I was running through the streets, and I remember seeing African-American men in their 60s. They were weeping because they had never expected that a black man would become president, and it was beautiful. It was beautiful. And it's when we survey America now, that sense of unity and optimism and hope, which was what Barack Obama campaigned on, it seems very absent. I think, as I reflect on our environment in New Zealand too, there's a certain hopelessness that in the roles that you're in, that you need to fight against, given our understanding of hope through the redemption of the gospel. I also spent an afternoon with Donald Trump. And boy, and this was before the politics. So, Donald Trump, so when you shake hands with Donald Trump, you know how it goes? Are you familiar with the power shake? I'm on the top, you're on the bottom, and it goes on and on and on. But the weird thing about Donald Trump is he's a germaphobe. He hates touching strangers, but he likes the power. He's a paradoxical individual. It was quite, talk to me later about the state of his desk. But that was just one of the experiences I had. And obviously, I'd moved out of Bushwick. I was earning money, real money, actually more money than I'd seen in my life because I was working quite a lot. And my novel, Their Faces Were Shining, that was being published at a university press. I'd always loved writing. I wrote a novel when I was in my 20s. Thankfully, it didn't get published. But this one did, and it was not on timwilson.com publishing, but a genuine, reputed publisher. And things were going so well that a gossip page anointed me one year New Zealand's most fascinating man. Now, I wasn't New York's most fascinating by a long chalk, but they said this. And so, how did I feel? I felt miserable, and I felt false, and I felt empty. Because everything that I was saying and doing, they were lines from a script that I've been writing since my 20s, trying to be the character that I wanted to be. Like this metropolitan, semi-intellectual, a cynic, a TV guy, literary guy, loved literature, but, unsurprised by anything. Stone-hearted, in a sense. And at the apex of my success, I was a failure as a human being. And I could feel it. You have all this feedback, but I think there's still an ache within us. There's a disharmony that we all recognize when our souls are not being nurtured. And for someone who had, I grew up in a series of Presbyterian manses. My father's a Presbyterian minister. Then at university, I lost my faith, as many do. I was an atheist in my 20s, but then the energy level sort of declines a bit. So I just became one of those agnostics in my 30s and early 40s. Just that kind of elegant grey despair that agnostics have. You don't have to explain. We don't know. It's whereas atheists, I like atheists because you can have an argument with atheists. Like I met this guy recently at a wedding, and he was like, we were talking about, there was a church wedding, and it's like, I'm an atheist, and I said, I'm Catholic, and he said, I used to be a Catholic, and I said, I used to be an atheist. And it was a great conversation. So I found myself, for a variety of reasons, going to a vigil mass at St. Cecilia's in Spanish Harlem. I'm a lazy man. It was the one just right. It's on 106th Street. But also, the thing about St. Cecilia's was that I would drive past there after doing live shots at 2 a.m. and the homeless in that area would always collect on the front steps of that church, and it seemed like a place of refuge in some sense. So I went there. It was August 2010, and if you've been in New York during that time of year, so everything is sweating. I was sweating. The building was sweating. And it was Spanish Harlem. It's a working poor area, so there's a working poor congregation there. It's a vigil. The priest, Father Peter Mushi, Tanzanian, and as a ex-Presbyterian, it's like, wow, so, it's all about the homily, right? Because, it's about the sermon. I didn't understand a damn word of the homily because Father Peter, I wasn't quite clued into Father Peter's accent. And I was like, well, what's going on here? But what got me was the liturgy, because we didn't have that typically. I mean, not in the same way in the Presbyterian Church. And it's to stand up, sit down, kneel, submit, and then the Eucharist. And I found myself really moved, like touched by the Holy Spirit. Like I found myself weeping because I guess there was a recognition. Sorry, I usually, when I was rehearsing this, I'm like, I don't actually do this anymore. What's happening? But I do this, so forgive me. But it was just like, and I was like, these tears are streaming down my face, and I feel weird because it's like, I'm this TV tough guy. I do the news. I shouldn't be crying. I haven't cried in years. And I hadn't. But I was touched. And we look at Ezekiel 36:26. I will take your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. And that was the gift to me, I think, of that vigil mass. And at the end of it, Father Peter, he did this thing. It's like, okay, so whose anniversary is it? And someone stood up, and then whose birthday is it? And then he said, is there anyone here for the first time? And I was sitting down the back like a recalcitrant schoolboy, and I sort of put my hand up, and all these lovely people clapped me, and I was there because I didn't like me, but they were applauding me, and it was so so wonderful. I guess as I reflect on it, after years of looking for things to be against, I had found something and someone to be for. And so that mess led to many other messes. And I ended up actually, from that vigil mass, I ended up going to mass at the cathedral in Auckland. I moved back to New Zealand and started going to mass at the cathedral. And that was where I met my wife, Rachel. And I didn't know she'd be my wife. In fact, I'd pretty much given up on the idea because I was well past my prime. But if you don't mind, like I could describe it for you in a speech. I wrote a poem. Do you mind if I write? I still like to write. So let me read you. It's called Unmarried Love. Being the most beautiful woman in God's house, immediately I judged you. Present accidentally, someone's friend, deceived into liturgy by flat whites after, and during the kiri I noticed, much too chatty. Sentence was handed down, look for a drudge if you want love. Forgive me, you know how much I hate and need abundance. My fears were freed 6 weeks hence in the sacristy, rostered to read at 11 a.m. Mass. Me, then you, then the gospel. Months later, you would comment, I appeared perplexed. I'd been working that look for decades, essaying cool. Your skirt was almost as small as my talk, which I fumbled, asking, don't you get nervous at the lectern? It's like walking to the slaughter, you replied, mocking, amused, dead-eyed. Pretty girls don't say such things and stay merely pretty. The organ roisted, you hoisted the word, we advanced. In following, one submits. In submitting, one edits. I was there for mercy, not love. How wrong can one be? Fixing my eye on feet, I trailed them rather than your smirking calves up the aisle. Our first official stroll, gentle dove, into the shadow of a love terrifying, self-sacrificial, edifying, and droll. And when I read that to a colleague, he's like, "Why droll?" And I'm like, "Well, God has a great sense of humour." I think fantastic. So Rachel met that vigil mass led to Rachel, and Rachel led me to Maxim, and because in pursuing her, I went to an event there. And this leads me, I guess, to the fortitude part of my speech. And fortitude is a strength of mind that allows one to endure pain, adversity, or danger with courage. But first, I want to just talk a bit about Maxim. So it's been around for 20 years, and I say it's a public policy research and analysis think tank, and everyone goes, "Hey, what's that?" And basically, we just help leaders make wise decisions. Maxim is a place of ideas, and ideas have consequences. I think they shape us, and they shape our world by default. So I didn't really intend to go there, but the Holy Spirit just started going, you know, the voice of God, it's not in the earthquake, it's not in the fire, it's not with the rushing wind, it's in that whispering. And so I ended up applying for the role of executive director at Maxim, and I got it. And it was just completely different. As I reflect on it, you know, I think, well, for 30 years in media, I was part of the problem. Going to an organisation like Maxim, I could at least be part of a solution, and try and do things a bit more slowly and a bit more deeply. I think we're doing things more deeply. I'm not convinced we're doing things more slowly, but that's another story. Look, I think the thing to say about Maxim as well is that we're independent. We don't rely on government contracts, so we're a charity. We're supported by donors, by trusts, etc. And the way we do what we do is through a variety of things. The biggest thing is, or sort of the centerpiece, is peer-reviewed research. And we research education. We love teachers and principals. We know that you have a tough job, and I know personally because Rachel was a teacher, and she was actually a researcher in education at Maxim, and then decided to go out, and her research bumped up against the real-life experience as she taught in various decile public schools in Auckland. Our education work, it focuses, we've done papers on advocating for a content-rich national curriculum that better serves both teachers and students. We're evaluating the evidence that greater support for independent schools, how that will enrich the whole educational ecosystem. The other thing we're going to do a paper on very soon, going to release it, is exploring the challenges and opportunities artificial intelligence presents for education. And we just got a reviewer, because we peer review all our work, a reviewer of that paper on this Monday. And she says that the discussion of AI in the paper that we've got mirrors the situation she finds her school in. You recognise the gains that AI brings in finding the gaps in kids' knowledge. It's a useful tool. And to support teachers in administration, which I'm sure you guys love, right? I mean, that's the great part of being a teacher, is the admin and the marking. But there's also reservations given the amount of increased screen time and our understanding of the value of human contact, which is just so important. Look, we're also doing a paper on artificial intelligence and work. And I think the thing about that is that, you know, blue-collar workers, automation mostly affected blue-collar workers. AI is going to affect white-collar workers. Chase Manhattan Bank, for example, introduced AI in, last year, 2023. In 1 year, it saved 360,000 hours of labour costs. So white-collar workers are next in the firing line. And as we consider that, and the high rates of unemployment, we also need to consider just what is it about work that conveys a dignity, the human dignity of work, where you have a workplace with people you don't necessarily get along with. It shapes our character. Work. You have deadlines, things that you don't like, as I learned in Washington, D.C. So all of those are big questions. Besides research, we run events like the Sir John Graham Lecture. We're going to bring a leading constitutional scholar, Professor Nicholas Aroney, to speak about the compass of character. How do we build character to create a good society? We also do a 12-week internship during summer for young people who are interested in policy and politics. And so if you know anyone who you think might be great for that, it's usually people in their early 20s. By all means, we've got a standout in the main area, so come and see us. But one of those interns who was in this year's course said, I learned more in the 12 weeks of that course than I did in 3 years at university. But the help goes both ways, so we get them to meet people like ex-PMs. And one of the ex-PMs that we spoke with, we were walking back to the car and they said, you know what, that was the most stimulating meeting I've had in a long time, where there was a lot of back and forth between the young people and the seasoned campaigner. So really, really interesting exchanges. And look, I imagine you're thinking, wow, this sounds amazing. Maxim Institute, Tim, how do I connect? How do I find out more? Well, Bob, can you bring up the slide, please? This is our QR code. Follow us on Instagram. Connect with us. So we've got our education researcher, Marianne Spurtle, is down with me. Come and have a talk to us. We're in the stand. We've got research. We give you a copy of Flint and Steel magazine, which is a magazine that we do. Sign up for our emails. But how many people are on Instagram? Who's on us? Can you do that? Because That's how you'll find out about us. Okay, the advertisement's over. I'll stop now. I'll stop. Essentially, Maxim is asking, what is meaningful, what is true, and what's hopeful? And I think Catholic schools play a huge role in answering these questions because of the special understanding that Catholics have of what it means to be a human being. So I really want my message to you to be one of encouragement. Keep up the struggle. Don't pretend that you're instilling values. I hate that word, values. It's such a corporate word that are agreeable to the world. You're raising children in virtue and in holiness, and that's important. What does holiness look and sound like? Well, it looks and sounds like a teacher kneeling in the cloak bay before school opens, praying for the children she will teach that day. I'm talking about real life examples here. These are people I know. And praying for them by name according to their strengths and failings. It looks and sounds like a principal who prays for each child under her care by name, which may explain why this person knew all the names of the kids in the school. And to be fair, it's a small school, a smallish school, around 200 kids. But when was the last time you prayed for 200 people by name? I'm going to ask, put up your hand if you haven't, and I'm in that. I'm definitely in that. So, that's one example of holiness, but also it's another principal who abandons his desk in the morning to play basketball with the boys who get there early and not always win. But he's doing it to connect with them because boys need to be run like dogs. We all know this, right? Boys need to be run like dogs. And how do I know this? Because Rachel and I have 4 boys, and that's just because I'm a waistcoat-wearing, poetry-writing alpha male who can only produce boys. If anyone, seriously, if you've got any spare girls, we'll give you 2 for 1, okay? So look, this is my story, I guess, from failure to faith to fortitude. So I encourage you to persist in the mahi that you have, because it is a good work and it is a necessary work in our nation at this time. As I'm sure you all know, the failure, that comes pretty easily. It's what you do with it. The faith is an ongoing kneeling at the foot of the cross while remembering the joy of the empty tomb. And fortitude, well, that's a work in progress too. But my hope lies in the fact that I don't have to do this alone, and also that this is the work that we were made for. So I want to end by quoting a guy called David Brooks. He wrote a book called The Road to Character. It's a moral logic, not an economic one. You have to give to receive. You have to surrender to something outside yourself to gain strength within yourself. You have to conquer your desire to get what you crave. Success leads to the greatest failure, which is pride. Failure leads to the greatest success, which is humility and learning. In order to fulfill yourself, you have to forget yourself. In order to find yourself, you have to lose yourself. Let's put it another way. The Gospel according to St. John, chapter 12, verse 24. I assure you, most solemnly I tell you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just one grain. It never becomes more, but lives by itself alone. But if it dies, it produces many others and yields a rich harvest. Thank you, and may God bless you.
Well, kia ora tātou. On behalf of the New Zealand Catholic Education Office Board and all of us, I'd like to thank Tim Wilson for his keynote this morning. Tim, you spoke about failure, about faith and about fortitude. and I'd like to respond with a couple of my own F words in the spirit of alliteration, not that one. But Tim, firstly to your family, we honour your first vocation as a husband and a father, and so we thank Rachel and the boys for sharing you with us here in Wellington today. But secondly, for your fearlessness to address 700 odd educated, not all odd, but 700 educators, principals, bishops, priests is a daunting prospect. But we needed your message of encouragement. We needed a message of inspiration and hope. Those of us who were here at the 2018 convention could not have fathomed what was waiting for us just around the corner with the pandemic, the disruption, the divisiveness that exacerbated. So thank you for your encouragement. And I feel, for me, your encouragement was pointing us to the ultimate source of hope, of encouragement, of inspiration, the good news of Jesus Christ. And that's why we're here. So Tim, we thank you. Please join me in giving him a Harlem Spanish round of applause.